Evelyn adjusted the wide-brimmed hat perched on her auburn curls and gazed at her reflection in the hallway mirror. She pressed her lips together, almost hoping to see a flicker of doubt in her own eyes. The wide hazel irises stared back, calm and clear, revealing no second thoughts. Carefully, she swung the mirror so she could get a full view of the small living room behind her. Her senior dog, once a spry, bounding creature named Rusty, sat on the floor, tail quietly wagging. He didn't understand what would happen next, and Evelyn's shoulders tensed at the thought that she would soon betray the same loyal friend who had loved her for a dozen years. Rusty's once bright eyes had dulled with age, but they still glowed with unwavering devotion. The act she was about to carry out was unthinkable to most, something that would break hearts if discovered. Yet she had justified it to herself, the medical bills, the inconvenience, the demands on her time. Even so, she couldn't deny a small pang of guilt that pricked at her conscience, telling her that there had to be another way, but she ignored it. She had made up her mind. Rusty's final chapter in her life story would end today. He was old, she reasoned. Maybe he wouldn't even notice what was happening, or so she told herself. Evelyn forced her lips into a smile and called out, "Walk time, Rusty!" The old dog's ears perked up at the magic word, and he scrambled to his shaky feet. Though advanced in years, Rusty's devotion seemed as solid as ever. His tail thumped against the hardwood floor, each wag accompanied by a soft huff of excitement. Without fail, even at his age, Rusty had been the most loyal creature in Evelyn's life. That would make what she had planned all the more horrific. She leaned down to clip on the leash, feeling a tremor in her fingertips when they brushed Rusty's graying muzzle. He let out a short bark as though to say, "Let's go already," and Evelyn bit her bottom lip. She inhaled, trying to steel herself. She imagined the freedom this would bring. No more puddles on the floor in the mornings, no more expensive vet bills, no more anxious howls whenever she left the house. It was heartless, yes, but she thought she was at her wit's end. As soon as she unlatched the door, Rusty stepped forward, ready to trot down the porch steps. That day, the weather was unexpectedly dreary for mid-June. Clouds hung low and gray, swirling overhead as a bitter breeze made the early morning feel more like late autumn. Rusty didn't seem to mind. With an eagerness he could barely manage, he pulled ahead, trying to lead the way toward his favorite route by the park. Evelyn, however, gently steered him to the left, guiding him in the opposite direction from their usual path. Rusty hesitated, but a comforting pat on his back from Evelyn made him follow along. His nails clicked on the pavement, setting a slow, rhythmic tempo as the pair moved through the sleepy suburban neighborhood. Evelyn's gaze flicked around anxiously, hoping no neighbors were awake enough to notice them. She walked with careful, tense steps, but Rusty didn't sense any difference. He was too busy sniffing the new scents along this unfamiliar route. In his old age, Rusty moved with deliberate curiosity, taking a moment to poke his muzzle into every small nook by the sidewalk. Evelyn's voice was tight as she tried to coax him along, almost urging him faster as if she wanted to get this over with. The quiet street was lined with identical-looking houses, each with a neat yard, and Rusty sniffed around, then lowered his muzzle as though something invisible tugged at his heart. Evelyn guided him toward her car, which sat parked at the end of the street. She had left it there the previous evening, so her plan would go off smoothly. The trunk was already open. Rusty hopped in, hesitant and with difficulty because of his old joints, and Evelyn carefully slammed the trunk door shut behind him, the loud clang echoing in the stillness. The sound made her pulse race, and she exhaled shakily, stepping around to the driver's seat and dropping into it. Rusty, unsure what was happening, pawed gently at the trunk window, but Evelyn pulled away before she could let any lingering guilt stop her. She drove in silence for nearly 40 minutes, leaving the manicured lawns and familiar grocery stores of her neighborhood behind. Gradually, the shops became sparse, the land wide open with fields of tall grass swaying in the wind. The mountains were dark shapes in the distance, half hidden by the shifting gray clouds. Rusty whimpered a little, as if uncertain about this strange new trip. Typically, he loved car rides, leaning his muzzle out the window to feel the fresh breeze. but Evelyn kept the windows rolled up, and he stood in the trunk, occasionally losing balance when she took a particularly sharp turn. At last, the road turned to gravel and led to a lonely field that stretched out as far as the eye could see. On the horizon, a single barn stood, abandoned and derelict, its roof collapsed in parts. The place felt haunting and strangely appropriate for a cowardly act. Evelyn's heart thudded. This was it, the moment she'd commit the betrayal. She told herself it was for the best. She wanted to ignore the part of her that said, "You'll regret this." She cut the engine and listened to the eerie silence. Even the wind had died down momentarily, as if holding its breath. Slowly, she opened the driver's door and walked around to the trunk. She glanced around quickly. There was no one in sight. Rusty's tail wagged slowly, uncertain. He must have guessed they were going somewhere new for a quick walk. Evelyn opened the trunk, grabbed the leash, and helped Rusty climb out, his limbs wobbling on the rocky ground. The old dog looked around, sniffing the cold air. There was no park bench, no grassy playground, no children laughing, none of the usual sights and sounds he'd come to expect. Evelyn swallowed and drew in a shaky breath. Time was short. She coaxed Rusty to walk away from the car a few yards, all the while making little affectionate noises. He walked with her, trusting as ever. Then, in a flash, she slipped the leash from his collar, turned, and ran back toward the car. Rusty let out a confused bark. He was old, but not oblivious. He sensed the sudden urgency, heard the slamming car door, recognized the ignition's roar. He tried to trot after her, but his arthritic hips slowed him, his paws scuffed in the gravel, losing traction. Evelyn pressed down on the gas. She heard Rusty's frantic bark. She glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there, tail drooping in confusion, muzzle pointed at her departing car. He let out another bark, more desperate, and started limping forward. Her heart twisted into a knot, but she kept driving until Rusty disappeared behind a veil of swirling dust. Inside the vehicle, her chest felt hollow. She wanted to cry, but she pushed back the tears. She clenched her teeth so hard her jaw ached. She'd done it. No more senior dog to look after. No more vet appointments. She repeated it like a mantra. He'll be fine. He'll find someone else. It's not my responsibility anymore. All these thoughts barreled through her mind over and over, as if to stave off the pangs of guilt that threatened to crumble her resolve. Yet neither she nor Rusty could have imagined the consequences of that morning's treachery. That faithful old dog was about to embark on the strangest and perhaps most important journey of his life. When the dust settled, Rusty stood alone in the wide field, the gray sky a dim, dismal canopy overhead. For a moment, he believed he only had to wait, and she'd come back. He sat, panting lightly, peering at the vanishing point where the car had gone. As the seconds stretched into minutes and then into a silent hour, Rusty began to understand in his canine way that something was wrong. A chilly wind rustled the tall grass around him, and the clouds started to break, allowing occasional rays of weak sunlight to peek through. No footsteps, no voices, just an endless sea of green and browns shifting around him. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. Normally, by this time he'd be settling in at home for breakfast, or lying beside Evelyn's feet. Now there was nothing, no one. Slowly he turned in circles, sniffing at the air for any sign of a familiar scent. All he smelled was dirt, wild grass, a faint mustiness from the crumbling barn in the distance. That old barn, bleak as it was, provided the only semblance of shelter. Rusty started in that direction, each step labored. His hip joints ached, and he missed the comfortable bed he had at home. Gradually, as he drew near, he saw broken windows and a large door hanging crookedly on rusted hinges. Inside it was dark and smelled of damp wood and old hay. Rusty sniffed around the threshold, paws sinking into the soggy ground. The interior was strewn with fallen beams, scattered debris, and rotting bales of hay. He found a corner that was relatively dry and circled it several times before plopping down with a resigned huff. Hours passed, the sky dimming from gray to the orange hues of sunset, then fading to a cold, starless night. Rusty shivered. A few times he stood and paced, whining softly at the emptiness that surrounded him. At one point, a coyote howled in the distance, sending a jolt of primal fear through his old bones. His heart raced, and he tried to bark back, but couldn't muster the strength to do more than let out a trembling yip. He rested his muzzle on his paws, eyes drooping in exhaustion. Somehow, amid the loneliness and the nibbling hunger, he dozed off, dreaming of the home he had known. Fireside evenings with Evelyn reading a magazine and him curled up at her feet. He dreamed of his younger self bounding through sprinklers in the summer sun, Evelyn laughing as she chased him with a camera. In his dream, they never left each other's side, but dreams end and reality returns. Rusty woke to dampness soaking his belly and the wind whistling through the broken barn. Cold and stiff, he rose to continue his quest for survival. It was early morning, and the clouds overhead moved faster now, hinting at rain. Rusty let out a sigh, or the canine equivalent, and started out of the barn. He hadn't eaten in a day, and it weighed on him. But thirst was pressing harder. He lifted his nose, sniffing for water. Maybe there was a stream nearby. Trotting carefully, he picked his way through tall grass, occasionally stumbling in small holes. He'd gone half a mile when the terrain sloped, revealing the glimmer of water in a shallow creek bed. Grateful, Rusty limped toward it. He reached the creek and lapped at the water, panting loudly, taking in as much as he could. It was cold, refreshing, and momentarily soothing, even as his old legs threatened to collapse beneath him. After he'd had his fill, Rusty ambled along the edge of the creek, hoping to find something edible. A stray morsel, some leftover scraps from another traveler, anything. It was a desperate hope. He soon realized that isolation was near total out here. Then he caught the unexpected sound of footsteps over gravel, the shuffle of boots. He raised his head, ears lifting as best they could in his old age. A young woman with braided blonde hair, wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, emerged from behind a stand of trees near the creek. She was carrying a camera slung around her neck. When her eyes fell on Rusty, she stopped dead in her tracks. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, stepping forward gingerly. "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" Her voice was gentle, and Rusty, too exhausted to be fearful, wagged his tail just once, hopefully. She crouched down and reached out a tentative hand. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." Her name was Kimberly, a nature photographer who enjoyed hiking the lesser-known trails. She had driven out that morning to photograph the sunrise over the tall grass fields. She hadn't expected to find an abandoned senior dog. Slowly, Rusty limped closer, allowing her hand to rest on his head. Kimberly felt the ridges of his spine, his trembling muscles. "You're so skinny," she murmured, voice thick with concern. She looked around, saw no one. The dog's condition suggested he'd been alone for at least a day or two. "Let's see if you have a collar." Gently, she fingered the old red collar around his neck and read the scratched name tag, Rusty. The engraving had mostly worn away, but the name was still visible. No phone number, no address. Kimberly chewed her lip, glancing back to her car parked near the roadside a few hundred yards away. "All right, Rusty, let's get you out of here." She rose, speaking to him like he was an old friend. Rusty wagged his tail again. The relief he felt at receiving kindness overpowered any hesitation. His old eyes shone with that unwavering canine trust. Kimberly offered him some jerky from her pack, and he took it gingerly, as though unsure if he was allowed to eat. Then, with a short bark, he followed her. The walk back to her vehicle was slow. Rusty limped badly on his left hind leg. Twice, Kimberly stopped to let him rest and offered him more water from a collapsible bowl she kept for her own dog at home. By the time they reached her SUV, the day had fully broken, and the clouds parted, letting sunlight pour onto the fields. Kimberly opened the back door. "Up you go," she said softly, though she could see from Rusty's trembling that he might not be able to jump on his own. Without hesitating, she slipped her arms under his belly and carefully hoisted him onto the seat. He whined but didn't resist, placing his paws on the cushion. The moment he was settled, he let out a sigh of relief, as though the softness under him was enough to bring solace after his night on the cold barn floor. Sliding into the driver's seat, Kimberly glanced in the rearview mirror at the old dog curled up in back. She felt a well of anger bubble up inside her. She'd seen strays before, but something about Rusty's worn collar suggested he hadn't been a stray all his life. Someone had abandoned him. "I don't know who left you out here," she muttered, "but I promise I'll take good care of you now." Rusty seemed to relax at the sound of her voice, laying his muzzle on the seat, breathing softly. Meanwhile, Evelyn wasn't having the carefree day she'd imagined. Instead of relief, she felt tension coil tighter around her chest with every passing hour. She had woken that morning expecting to feel unburdened, yet guilt clung to her. Images of Rusty's last desperate bark echoed in her mind. She'd snapped at her coworkers all morning, only to apologize awkwardly. Her boss even asked if she wanted to take a personal day. She declined. Late in the afternoon, she stopped by the local coffee shop. As she stood in line, she noticed a bulletin board with missing pet flyers. One in particular caught her eye. A dog named Charlie, with big ears and a family that apparently missed him dearly. She swallowed, vividly recalling Rusty's trusting face. A pang hit her. Was she really free now, or had she only exchanged one burden for another? Guilt? She arrived home to the quiet she'd craved. No nails clicking on the floor, no scruffy muzzle greeting her at the door, no water bowl to refill. An odd emptiness filled the space. Evelyn tossed her keys onto the kitchen counter and stood there, hand resting on the sink, trying to fight the creeping loneliness. She shook her head, whispering to herself, "It's better this way." But as she walked through each silent room, a hollow ache grew. Rusty's dog bed lay in the corner of the living room, the indent of his body still visible in the worn cushion. That night she tried to sleep, but found herself pacing in the small hours, half expecting to hear Rusty's soft breathing. Finally, she sank onto the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest, feeling tears well up. Yet she still clung to her justification, repeating it like a shield. I couldn't afford his medical bills. He was getting old. He'd be a burden to anyone. The rationalizations felt weaker each time she uttered them. Over the next few days, Kimberly devoted herself to helping Rusty recover. She took him to a nearby veterinary clinic where Dr. Castillo, a warm-hearted vet with a kind smile, examined him thoroughly. Rusty's hips were severely arthritic. He had a couple of cracked teeth that would eventually need attention, and he was underweight from what appeared to be days of inadequate food. Dr. Castillo asked if Kimberly was Rusty's owner. Kimberly explained how she'd found him. The vet shook his head in dismay, speculating that Rusty had likely been abandoned. It wasn't an uncommon story, unfortunately. Despite his ailments, Rusty responded well to medication for his arthritis. With a specialized diet and rest, he began to perk up. Kimberly documented his recovery with her camera, partly out of habit as a photographer, and partly because she found solace in capturing the small victories. Rusty, taking a short walk down the block, wagging his tail a bit more each day, or dozing contentedly in a patch of sunlight by the window. However, Kimberly's own life was complicated. She lived in a modest apartment that didn't allow large dogs. She was already pushing the rules by owning her medium-sized lab mix, Honey. She'd have to find a solution for Rusty soon, but the thought of handing him off to a crowded shelter made her heart twist in her chest. Shelters were packed, and elderly dogs were often the first to be overlooked by potential adopters. She worried he'd languish there indefinitely. She posted Rusty's story on local social media pages, a photo of the old dog, a summary of how she found him, and a plea for any leads on an owner or a potential forever home. The post garnered sympathy and heartbreak. People commented with outrage at the concept of abandoning an old dog, but no one came forward claiming ownership, and few people stepped up to adopt. Most fosters wanted puppies or healthier dogs. Still, Kimberly refused to give up. She spent evenings calling acquaintances, checking rescue networks, and searching for a dog-friendly senior living situation. The more she bonded with Rusty, the more she contemplated ignoring her apartment rules. Meanwhile, Rusty grew stronger. He warmed up to Kimberly's lab, Honey, and the two would nap side by side. Kimberly would watch them and wonder, how could anyone discard such a gentle soul? Weeks passed, and Evelyn's life became a series of restless nights and empty routines. She tried to focus on work, going out with friends, or reading. However, Rusty's memory haunted her. Her phone, once full of pictures of him wearing silly hats or playing in the backyard, now felt like a taunting device. She avoided looking at those pictures. She found herself quietly rethinking her decision. What if I'd just tried a little harder? Found a charity or a rescue group? Or asked a family friend for help? She started having nightmares about Rusty wandering, lost and alone, calling out for her. In some dreams, she'd try to run to him, but her feet wouldn't move, and he'd fade away into darkness. She woke with tears on her pillow, heart thrashing, a dull ache pulsing in her throat. That morning, she rummaged through an old stack of papers in the guest room and found Rusty's adoption papers from when he was just a small puppy. In that moment, she was struck by an image of her younger self, cradling that squirming furball with tears of joy. Now the memory made her chest tighten with shame. One day, as she perused social media, something, she wasn't sure what, compelled her to join a local community page. She stumbled on a post, a picture of an old golden brown dog with a graying muzzle labeled Found Senior Dog. Evelyn's heart seized in her chest. She clicked it. Could it be? The dog had the same soulful eyes, the same red collar. The post, by someone named Kimberly, recounted his abandonment, his poor health, and the rescue efforts made to care for him. It asked if anyone recognized him. Evelyn felt as though her soul had shattered. She knew immediately it was Rusty. She saw the comments. Hundreds of them. People lamenting the cruelty of someone who'd leave such a sweet dog to die alone. Her face burned with shame. She realized in that moment that Rusty had survived and was now receiving love and care from someone else. Perhaps she should have felt relief, but the guilt only deepened. She turned off her phone and closed her laptop, trembling. Over the following days, she wrestled with two conflicting urges: to remain anonymous, bury her guilt, and hope no one discovered her identity, or to reach out, try to atone, and reclaim the dog she'd once loved. Kimberly took Rusty on short car rides to help him associate the vehicle with positive experiences. Each time, she'd give him a treat and let him stick his muzzle out the window. In just a few weeks, his coat grew shinier from the healthy food she was providing. His eyes, once dull, now shone with curiosity. Honey, her lab mix, would nudge Rusty's flank playfully, coaxing him into a gentle tussle in the living room. They were forming a bond that was as unexpected as it was heartwarming. Though she loved Rusty dearly, Kimberly's landlord had finally caught wind of the second dog. A note arrived on her door, reminding her of the no large dog policy. She had to have a difficult conversation with her landlord, who ultimately gave her a 30-day warning to either rehome Rusty or face eviction. Panicked and upset, Kimberly renewed her efforts to find Rusty a permanent family. She took more photos, him smiling on short walks, him nuzzling Honey, and even him curled up in a dog bed with his face on a stuffed toy. She pleaded on social media, "Please share, this old boy deserves a loving home." The response was sympathetic, but no viable forever home came forward immediately. Elderly dogs often require extensive vet care, and many prospective adopters shied away. Kimberly spent evenings hugging Rusty, tears in her eyes, promising him she'd find a good solution. Rusty, for his part, remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil, content to have a full belly, a warm bed, and a friend who cared for him. 3 weeks had passed since Evelyn had found the post about Rusty. Each day she scrolled through the comments, seeing the outpouring of love from strangers. She felt something inside her crack. Enough was enough. She couldn't keep living with this guilt. She'd once loved Rusty. It was time to own up to what she'd done, no matter the consequences. She opened the messaging app, found Kimberly's profile, and hesitated, her fingers trembling over the keys. Then she typed a simple message. "Hello, Kimberly. I'm writing about Rusty. I believe I'm his original owner. I made a terrible mistake and want to see if I can make it right. Please let me know if we can talk." Evelyn hovered over the send button for several agonizing moments, heart racing. Finally, she clicked it. Then she placed her phone face down on the table and stared at it, feeling her world tilt on its axis. She had no idea how Kimberly would respond. If Kimberly found out the truth that Evelyn had abandoned Rusty, she might lash out or refuse to let Evelyn near the dog. 1,000 possibilities crowded Evelyn's mind. To her surprise, Kimberly responded within the hour. "Hi, Evelyn. Thank you for reaching out. Rusty has become very dear to me. Can you tell me more about your situation?" Evelyn swallowed thickly and typed back a cautious reply, leaving out the worst details. She explained how Rusty's medical issues overwhelmed her, how she felt she couldn't give him the care he needed, and that she believed leaving him in a rural area might allow him to find another home. It was a weak explanation, and she knew it, but it was all she could manage to type. Kimberly's initial answers were polite but guarded. She asked if Evelyn had proof of ownership, such as adoption papers or vet records. Evelyn had both and scanned them over. Kimberly then asked the question that made Evelyn's heart hammer. Did you deliberately abandon him, or was there some misunderstanding? Evelyn paused for a long time. Lying now would only delay the inevitable. She decided to come clean. "I did. I am deeply sorry. I regret it every day. I know there's no excuse, but I want to make amends." Kimberly's reply took longer this time. When it arrived, it was clear she was angry but trying to remain civil. "He nearly died out there. If I hadn't found him, he might have starved. This is serious. I've poured weeks of care and money into him. Why should I trust you again?" Evelyn read those lines over and over, tears stinging her eyes. She typed back, "I'm not asking for immediate trust. I just want a chance to see him, to show you that I'm serious about making this right. Please." Another pause. Then Kimberly responded, "Fine, let's meet. We'll see if Rusty wants to see you, but be prepared for him to hate you, or to not remember you at all." The day of the meeting arrived. Evelyn drove to a park that Kimberly had chosen, neutral ground. The sky was a brilliant blue, the sun shining with uncharacteristic warmth for late summer. Her stomach churned, her hands felt cold despite the weather. Every nerve in her body told her to run, to avoid this confrontation. Yet something stronger within her insisted that she needed to face the consequences of her actions. She parked and spotted a figure standing near a large oak tree, accompanied by 2 dogs. One was Honey, a lively lab mix who wagged her tail at passerby. The other was Rusty. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. He was thinner than before, but his coat had a renewed sheen, and his eyes seemed brighter. Even from a distance, she could see the gray patches around his muzzle had grown, but there was a certain dignity in his posture. Kimberly locked eyes with Evelyn and gave a curt nod. Evelyn approached slowly, tears threatening to spill. Rusty was busy sniffing the grass, oblivious at first. Kimberly cleared her throat. "Rusty, meet Evelyn," she said in a guarded tone. Rusty lifted his head, his ears perked as he caught Evelyn's scent. His tail gave one uncertain wag. Evelyn sank to her knees, tears streaming now. She patted her thighs, calling out in a shaky voice, "Rusty! Hey, buddy!" For a moment he seemed unsure, tilting his head as though trying to retrieve a distant memory. Then recognition flickered, and he let out a low, tentative whine. Slowly, he hobbled toward her. Evelyn stretched out her arms, her heartbeat thudding in her ears. When he reached her, she gently placed her hands on either side of his face, burying her fingers in his fur, feeling the softness and warmth she had missed. She whispered, "I'm sorry," over and over, tears dripping onto his muzzle. Rusty tentatively licked her cheek, and Evelyn let out a strangled sob. She could hardly believe he still recognized her, much less greeted her with a gesture of forgiveness. Watching this from a few feet away, Kimberly swallowed hard, arms folded. She saw the raw regret on Evelyn's face. Still, she couldn't quell her protective instincts toward Rusty. This was a dog who had almost died under Evelyn's carelessness. She cleared her throat. "I'll give you 2 a moment," she said softly, though her posture remained tense. Evelyn stroked Rusty's ears and apologized again, feeling lightheaded with emotion. She wanted to explain to him, though she knew he couldn't fully grasp her words. She told him how she had panicked, how she was afraid she couldn't handle the finances or the time. She told him she was horrified by her own lack of compassion, and all the while Rusty gazed at her with those gentle brown eyes, occasionally wagging his tail. Finally, Kimberly stepped forward. "He's doing better now," she said matter-of-factly, "but as you can see, he still needs medication for his arthritis and a specialized diet. It's not cheap, and it takes dedication." Evelyn looked up, tears still on her cheeks. "I understand. I've saved up some money. I want to do whatever it takes to take care of him again, if you'll let me." Kimberly sighed. She'd expected to be furious, but the tearful regret in front of her was genuine. Still, she couldn't just hand Rusty back without proof that Evelyn had truly changed. "Look," she said, "I can't just give him back after everything that happened. What if you panic again and do something even worse?" Evelyn nodded. "I know. I want to earn him back. If that means covering his vet costs, volunteering at a rescue, whatever it takes, I'll do it." Kimberly studied her. "I was given a 30-day notice by my landlord to find Rusty a new home. Time's almost up. If we can figure something out, it has to be soon." Evelyn's eyes lit with a glimmer of hope, mixed with desperation. "Let me take him back right now," she pleaded. "I'll show you. I'm serious. I'll bring you receipts for his appointments. I'll post updates. Anything." Kimberly didn't respond right away. She looked at Rusty, who seemed content being near Evelyn again. She considered how it might break his heart to be separated from someone he evidently still recognized. Finally, she exhaled. "All right, I'll give you a chance, but I have conditions. Regular check-ins, proof of vet visits, and if at any point I believe Rusty's not safe, I'll come take him back. Understood?" Evelyn nodded rapidly, tears of relief falling anew. "Yes, of course." She sank down again to scratch Rusty behind the ears, whispering, "I promise, buddy. This time, I won't fail you." Within a week, Rusty was back in Evelyn's home. Kimberly helped transport him along with a bag of his special food, vet records, and medication. The dog bed in Evelyn's living room, unused and lonely, was once again a place of comfort for Rusty. That first evening, he curled up in it with a soft sigh. Evelyn hovered over him, offering water and gently petting him. In the days that followed, Evelyn took Rusty to the vet to continue his arthritis medication and scheduled dental work for his cracked teeth. She rearranged her work schedule to come home at lunchtime and check on him. She parted ways with some unnecessary subscriptions and luxuries to put more money into a Rusty fund, ensuring she had enough to cover any emergencies. Kimberly stayed in contact, sometimes dropping by unannounced to check on Rusty. Each time she found him content, often with a new toy or sleeping peacefully in a warm spot of sunshine near the window. Slowly, her anger toward Evelyn began to mellow. Still, she was watchful, determined that she wouldn't let Rusty suffer again. Evelyn seemed genuinely changed. She was quieter, kinder, more patient. She included Rusty in everything, whether that meant letting him sit by her while she read or giving him a gentle brush in the evenings. 1 month passed, then 2. Rusty gained weight, the house no longer felt empty, and Evelyn found herself cherishing even the mundane tasks: feeding Rusty, refilling his water bowl, administering his medication. Each routine reminded her of the second chance she had been granted. Slowly, an unspoken trust grew between her and Kimberly. They exchanged dog pictures. Kimberly would send updates on how Honey was doing, and Evelyn reciprocated with snapshots of Rusty dozing by the fireplace. Yet life has a way of testing our resolve. A shocking twist arrived one drizzly afternoon when Evelyn took Rusty for a short walk. It started as a peaceful outing. Rusty plodded along happily, sniffing at curbside flowers, while Evelyn held a large umbrella overhead. Suddenly, a car screeched around the corner, swerved to avoid a stray cat, and careened onto the sidewalk. Evelyn had only seconds to react, pulling Rusty's leash. The umbrella flew from her hands. The car smashed into a street lamp, missing Evelyn and Rusty by mere feet. Shaken, Evelyn stumbled, losing her grip. Rusty barked in confusion, ears pinned back in fear. Smoke rose from the car's hood. A young man staggered out, dazed. "I'm sorry," he managed, voice shaky. "The cat—" He pointed, but the cat was long gone. He was clearly in shock. Evelyn, still trembling, knelt by Rusty, who seemed unhurt but terrified. She dialed 911. When paramedics and police arrived, they checked the driver. He was unharmed beyond shock. Meanwhile, a paramedic noticed Rusty panting heavily and favoring his right hind leg even more than usual. He might have wrenched it during the scare. They advised Evelyn to get him checked out. She rushed him to the vet, heart pounding like a drum. Once again, she faced the possibility of losing the companion she'd so carelessly abandoned before. Dr. Castillo ran some x-rays and confirmed that Rusty's hip had sustained a small fracture from the sudden jerk, likely exacerbating his existing arthritis. The vet recommended a more involved surgery to stabilize the joint, as well as careful follow-up therapy. It was a hefty financial cost, thousands of dollars, more than Evelyn had saved in her Rusty fund. Evelyn felt tears brimming again. She recalled the reason she'd abandoned Rusty in the first place: fear of mounting bills and complications. But this time, she didn't hesitate. She gazed at Rusty lying on the exam table, trembling slightly, eyes flicking to her for comfort. Guilt, love, and determination mixed in her heart. She turned to Dr. Castillo. "Schedule the surgery. I'll find a way." She left the clinic, her mind already racing with ideas. She could take on extra freelance work after her 9-to-5 job. She could sell some of her possessions. She could even ask for a small loan from her credit union. Anything to ensure Rusty got the care he needed. When she informed Kimberly, the photographer offered to set up a small fundraising page online, highlighting Rusty's story of abandonment and second chances. Evelyn was hesitant. She still felt shame. But Kimberly insisted that people might want to help an elderly dog in need. The response astounded them both. Donations trickled in from complete strangers, people moved by Rusty's perseverance and the redemption in Evelyn's story. Although Evelyn's actions had been cruel at first, her willingness to atone struck a chord. Local animal lovers offered support, from homemade dog blankets to small checks and gift cards. In a matter of weeks, the surgical cost was covered. On the day of the procedure, Evelyn sat in the waiting room, heart pounding, Kimberly at her side for moral support. They waited, pacing the worn linoleum floor, jumping each time the door opened. Finally, Dr. Castillo appeared, a smile on his face. "Rusty did great," he said, removing his gloves. "He'll need time to heal and some follow-up therapy, but I'm optimistic." Tears of relief slid down Evelyn's cheeks. Kimberly squeezed her shoulder. It was an emotional moment. Not only had Rusty survived physically, but Evelyn had also proven she would do whatever it took to keep him safe. Rusty was wheeled out in a small kennel, groggy from anesthesia, but he let out a sleepy wag of his tail upon seeing Evelyn's face. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to the kennel door, whispering, "Thank you for giving me this chance to do right by you." Weeks later, Rusty was at home, snoozing by a sunny window. Evelyn set up a small ramp so he wouldn't have to strain his hips going up and down stairs. She sat beside him, lightly stroking his fur. She recalled their journey. From that careless day, she'd driven him out to an empty field, to his rescue by a stranger, to this moment of peaceful togetherness. She still wrestled with the memory of her betrayal, but she knew that each day was an opportunity to reaffirm her vow. Never again would she take Rusty's life and devotion for granted. Kimberly remained a friend, sometimes visiting with Honey. The two dogs would nap together, as if siblings. Kimberly had forgiven Evelyn, but also made it clear that Rusty's well-being was paramount. Over time, they built a genuine friendship, rooted in a shared love for the old dog they both cared for so dearly. Neighbors in Evelyn's community, once oblivious, now recognized her on her daily walks. The story of Rusty's abandonment had circulated, but the story of his miraculous second chance had also spread. Some judged Evelyn harshly. Others admired her turnaround. Evelyn didn't mind the opinions. Her focus remained on Rusty and ensuring he lived his golden years in as much comfort and joy as possible. Months passed, and the gray winter gave way to a bright spring morning. Evelyn woke early, preparing Rusty's medications and some soft food. She called him gently, and he rose from his bed, stiff but determined, tail wagging with that steady rhythm of contentment. They ambled to the front porch, where a fresh breeze blew. The scent of newly bloomed flowers filled the air. Rusty lowered his muzzle to sniff the breeze, blinking in the sunlight. Evelyn stood beside him, feeling gratitude bloom in her chest. She realized that, in saving Rusty a second time, she'd saved a part of herself, too. She might never fully erase the hurt she caused, but she had taken the steps to redeem herself. Rusty, ever forgiving, pressed his nose against her leg, and she bent down to kiss the top of his head. She silently thanked him for his unfailing love, for giving her the chance to be better. In that moment, she saw with utter clarity that what happens next in life can indeed shock you. But sometimes, the shock is simply discovering how much love, forgiveness, and hope can flourish where despair once took root.